Hey, welcome to the Black Ponder. I'm Neil Trotter. Today, we're talking about the philosopher that gives me the most views on my YouTube videos. It's true, that's Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche is very popular on the internet. And I think it's because he's very anti-establishment, right? And a lot of people are looking for that when they surf the internet. So that might be a reason why he's so popular. He's probably one of the most popular philosophers on the internet. I know for sure he definitely is one of the most popular philosophers on the internet. But anyway, we're going to be talking about his work, Beyond Good and Evil. Now, Beyond Good and Evil, the title is straight up, says exactly what the book is about. It's going beyond morality. Nietzsche argues that focusing on morality obscures the meaning of life. And it's a hindrance, it's a roadblock. It's a cage, right? We need to escape it to really figure out what's meaningful in life. It's funny because I really like reading Friedrich Nietzsche. The main reason why I like reading Friedrich Nietzsche is because about half the things he says I agree with, and about the other half I disagree with. And for me, that's really fun to be reading something and that's really deep and really challenging, and to wrestle with it and finally come to the conclusion like, I'm not really feeling that. I don't really buy that. I'm sorry. But there's a lot of things I do agree with Nietzsche. And this is reflected very well in Beyond Good and Evil. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the things I agree with and disagree with, and at the same time explore the meaning behind the book. We'll start off with a quote. This quote comes from part 1 of the book, On the Prejudices of Philosophers. It is high time to replace the Kantian question, how are synthetic judgments a priori possible, with another question, why is belief in such judgments necessary? That is to say, it is time to grasp that for the purpose of preserving beings such as ourselves, such judgments must be believed to be true, although they might, of course, still be false judgments. Or more clearly, crudely, and basically, synthetic judgments a priori should not be possible at all. We have no right to them. In our mouths, they are nothing but false judgments. But belief in their truth is of course necessary as foreground belief in ocular evidence belonging to the perspective optics of life. This actually brings me back to what I talked about in my Immanuel Kant Critique of Pure Reason video that I did a while ago. And then I mentioned how I first encountered Kant's philosophy, which was during a basic general philosophy class. And in that class, the professor gave like a brief overview of Kant's philosophy about the priori and what that is the true thing beyond our perspective, beyond the limitations of our senses. That is a thing in and of itself, and how that's different to how we perceive something to be. And she went all into that. And after she went over that brief overview, I raised my hand and I asked the professor, hey professor, if what Kant is saying is that what things truly are things that are beyond our perception, and we really can't really know what these things are because they go beyond what we can sense, then why is it important even to talk about these things? Why is it important to put so much effort into learning about it? Isn't this priori kind of irrelevant to life if it's beyond our perception, because our senses are what we use to interact with the world, right? Now, the professor gave a quick response, probably was asked that question many times, I'm guessing. Like, yeah, but if you think like that, then you're gonna make judgments and conclusions that are based off of false logic. And now let's move on to Soren Kierkegaard. Blah, 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 blah. She didn't really give me the time of day on that one. But later I studied it more in depth myself, and it turns out I agree with that answer, but a lot of people don't agree with that answer. Friedrich Nietzsche definitely doesn't agree with that answer. And a lot of people I've encountered on YouTube via comments and messages also don't agree with that answer. So let's talk about that. Let's move on to the next quote. This comes from part 2, The Free Spirit. Let us concede at least this much. There would be no life at all if not on the basis of perspective, evaluations, and appearances. And if, with the virtuous enthusiasm and awkwardness exhibited by some philosophers, one wanted to abolish the apparent world altogether, well, assuming you could do that, At any rate, nothing would remain of your truth either. Indeed, what compels us to assume there exists any essential antithesis between truth and false? Is it not enough to suppose grades of apparentness and, as it were, lighter and darker shades and tones of appearance, different valuers, to speak in the language of painters? Why could the world, which is of any concern to us, not be a fiction? And he who then objects, but to the fiction there belongs an author, could he not be met with the round retort, why? Does this belongs perhaps not also belong to the fiction? Are we not permitted to be a little ironical now about the subject as we are about the predicate and object? Ought the philosophers not to rise above the belief in grammar? All due respect to governesses, but is it not time that philosophy renounced the beliefs of governesses? This is a very interesting quote, and I kind of wrestle with this. I agree with it, and I don't agree with it. It kind of reminds me of when people say, when they read like a really powerful work of fiction, I'm thinking about things like Toni Morrison's like Beloved, for instance, or books like that are very fantastical and obviously works of fiction, but they're based off of real experiences and perspectives, right? And there's a lot of truth in that. And it is often the case that you can get toward the truth even deeper through works of fiction than you can if you just to give a non-fictional account of the things that happened that was focused 100% on just recording the truth. So it's true, you can't just throw away perspective evaluations and appearances, right? Because they do mean something, right? They carry a lot of meaning. But at the same time, you can't throw away a priori too, or the true meaning behind things. You can't do that either, because if you do that, you're going to lose your ability to consider the perspective of others. What I mean by that is, oftentimes when we put aesthetics above everything else, when we only consider what we ourselves can sense, how we feel about certain things, our own perspective of things, that can have us forget the truth behind the perspective of and reality of other people. I don't know, when I read Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, what I got out of it was not only are we unable to understand what something truly is ultimately, the other thing I got out of it is that we really can't truly ultimately understand what somebody else is, truthfully, because we're limited only to our own perspective, right? There's empathy, right? And empathy can only go so far, right? Of course, empathy is great. I know people who don't even believe in empathy, which is, I'm not one of those people. Empathy, I think, is very important. But I think empathy is only achievable if we're able to go beyond our senses, beyond our perspective, and consider the perspective of others. I think the whole notion of truth and a priori and the thing in and of itself, I think that whole philosophy can be expanded to incorporate the perspectives of other people. We often make the mistake of being trapped in our own perspective, how we feel, how we sense things are. And that can block us from how other people feel and other people's perspective. And their truths can be just as valid as our truths, even though oftentimes we're limited only to our own perspective, our own truth. Why is this important? Well, let me go to the next quote, and I'll try to expand upon this idea. This quote also comes from part 2, The Free Spirit. My judgment is my judgment. Another cannot easily acquire a right to it. Such a philosopher of the future may perhaps say, one has to get rid of the bad taste of wanting to be in agreement with many. Good is no longer good when your neighbor takes it into his mouth. And how could there exist a common good? The expression is a self-contradiction. What could be common has ever but little value. In the end, it must be as it is and has always been. Great things are for the great, abysses for the profound, shudders and delicacies for the refined, and in some, all rare things for the rare. I agree with this quote and I disagree with this quote. I don't know, to me it seems like a contradiction. At the one hand, it was exactly what I was saying before. How, everybody has their own individual judgments based on their own perspective, their own senses, their own emotions, how they feel about certain things. And it's important to acknowledge that separate from the true reality of what something is. It is important to acknowledge those individual judgments, those individual perspectives, the conclusions that people make based off of their own senses that are individual to them. But at the same time, you also have to be careful and not go so far as to say, well, my judgment is my judgment and that's all that matters, right? Because that's not all that matters. It could come to a point where you start thinking like that. Well, my judgment is the most important one, right? And then you either on purpose or a lot of times indirectly, accidentally, enforce your judgment onto other people who not only just don't agree with you, but just who they are as a person, their own perspective of things based off their senses directly conflicts with your own judgment, right? Then you have a situation where who's able to influence their power more effectively. And whoever is able to do that is able to enforce their judgment and infringe on the other person's ability to express themselves. Part of Aristotle's ethics, right? And Nietzsche is against Aristotle's ethics. But Aristotle said, most notably in the Nicomachean Ethics, that everybody has some innate trait about them that they're really good at. And they can use that trait to contribute to society, make society better, help civilization progress. And allowing that to happen is morally correct. And I agree with that, I really do. One moral I think that should be acknowledged, or I think is important, is the idea that everybody should have the opportunity to contribute to society, make civilization better, help people out, doing what they're good at. I personally believe that everybody is good at something, and oftentimes what they're good at aligns with their passion, what they enjoy doing. Because if you enjoy doing something, you're going to spend some time doing it, and you're going to get good at it. And I think it's morally good to allow that to happen. And then that person can contribute to society and help humanity grow. But oftentimes you see in this world people enforcing their judgments, their own perspectives, their own views based off their senses even. Not just their opinions or what they think, but their views based off of their senses. How they feel, how they think psychologically, because they're kind of hardwired that way. And they enforce that onto other people inadvertently, maybe because they're just in a higher position social economically or whatever. That judgment becomes dominant, and it directly goes against the perspective or the experiences of somebody else, and it limits that person that they're infringing on. They're not able to develop themselves, develop their interests, their passions into something they can be good at, and then they're not able to contribute to society in a constructive way. And personally, I think that's immoral. I think it's immoral because you're stagnating human development, human progression. You're not letting society flourish. I don't know, I think that could be a common good, this notion that we should allow everybody to do what they're good at in a constructive, meaningful way that helps society out. But I think to do that, what we have to do is we have to balance perspective evaluations and appearances with the truth, a priori, the thing in and of itself. We have to balance that. We have to acknowledge that both things are important. One is not more important than the other. We should be allowed to live fruitfully based off our own perspective and senses that we're pretty much born with, but not to the point where we're enforcing those perspectives onto others who it doesn't align with. Because when that happens, you limit that person that you're infringing on, you limit their ability to contribute to society, because then they can't do what it is that they're good at, that they're passionate about. I don't know, I feel like there are some set in stone moral things that need to be acknowledged just in society in general. But there are times when we do have to move beyond good and evil and acknowledge the perspective of other people, because one person might consider immoral, another person might consider moral. And that could just be based on who they are as a person. And as long as we're not infringing on a person's ability to contribute to society in a constructive way, we do need to consider what is beyond good and evil. So I agree with Friedrich Nietzsche, and I disagree with Friedrich Nietzsche. But that's fine. What do you think? Am I completely off? Have you read Beyond Good and Evil? Are you one of those people who are like, oh, how dare you defile the great work of Nietzsche? Because there are a lot of people on the internet who are like that when it comes to Nietzsche. And it's fine, it's all good if you disagree with me. Let's talk about it. It's all good. Comment below. Constructive comments will be greatly appreciated and taken seriously by me, of course. Troll comments will be laughed at and not taken seriously by me. But when it's all said and done, you've been watching The Black Ponder. I'm Neil Trotter. Tune in next time for more philosophical thought.